The jungle was alive with sound. Insects buzzed, strange bird-like creatures called from the high canopy, and somewhere in the distance, water rushed over stone. Daniel crouched low, checking the snare he had set at dawn. His traps were the only reason he had fresh meat to eat in this wild alien world. The dense vines and glowing plants pressed close on all sides, making it easy to hide and easy to get lost. As he moved to check another trap, a faint rustling caught his attention. Daniel froze, his hand tightening on the wooden spear he carried. The sound was coming from deeper in the undergrowth, slow but deliberate. He crept forward, pushing aside a thick curtain of vines. Then he saw her. Not an animal, not a creature he had hunted before, but a woman. Her skin shimmered a deep shade of violet, her long hair tangled with leaves and strands of glowing moss. And she was caught in his trap. She hung by her wrists, bound high in the woven vine snare. Her body twisted slightly as she tried to pull free, the muscles in her arms straining. Her eyes, bright and sharp like molten gold, locked on him instantly. She spoke in a language he didn't understand, her voice low and tense. Daniel stepped closer, keeping the spear between them. He had never seen an alien like her this close. Every detail of her face was flawless, but her gaze was fierce, like a cornered predator. Her voice grew louder, sharper, as she pulled against the vines again. Daniel caught the tone, if not the words. She thought he was going to kill her. The thought almost made him laugh, but he stayed silent. Slowly, he lowered the spear to show he wasn't about to strike. She stopped struggling for a moment, breathing hard, her chest rising and falling in quick bursts. The jungle around them seemed to quiet, as if watching. Daniel's mind worked quickly. She wasn't dressed like a civilian. The sleek black and silver armor she wore clung to her frame, marked with faint scratches and burns. She was a fighter, maybe a scout from one of the alien factions that roamed this part of the planet. If that was true, she was dangerous even. Without a weapon, but right now she was his prisoner. He wasn't sure whether to free her or keep her bound until he understood why she was here. She spoke again, softer this time, and her eyes flicked toward the ground before returning to his face. Daniel realized she was trying to negotiate. He stepped closer, careful not to trigger the trap's release by accident. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, even though he knew she couldn't understand. His voice was calm, steady. She blinked once, studying him, and then her shoulders eased slightly. It wasn't trust, but it wasn't pure fear anymore either. A sudden movement above made Daniel glance up. Two small reptile-like predators were climbing along the vines overhead, their eyes fixed on the struggling figure below. They had seen an opportunity for an easy meal. Daniel moved fast, swinging his spear upward and knocking one to the ground. The other hissed and leapt away into the leaves. The one on the ground scrambled up, but Daniel's second strike pinned it through the chest. When he turned back, the alien woman was staring at him differently. The fear was still there, but now there was something else, recognition that he had just saved her from becoming prey. She said something in her language, slower this time, as if testing the words. Daniel couldn't answer, but he could see the shift in her eyes. She was still bound, still wary, but she no longer looked at him as only an enemy. Daniel stepped back, resting the spear on his shoulder. In the deep shade of the jungle, with its damp heat pressing against them, they studied each other in silence. Neither moved to break the fragile moment. For now the trap held her, and the choice of what to do next was his alone. Daniel stood still, the weight of the decision pressing on him. The alien girl's eyes never left his face, her golden gaze sharp and unblinking. The vines creaked softly as she shifted, testing the trap again. He could see the strength in her arms and shoulders, but the way she held herself now was different, less like she was preparing to break free, more like she was waiting to see what he would do. Next, he stepped forward, sliding the spear to his back. Her muscles tensed instantly, ready to react, but she didn't flinch. Daniel reached up and inspected the vine knots. They were tight, strong enough to hold a struggling animal for hours. He hesitated, then cut one of the main strands with his knife. The tension eased slightly, lowering her arms but not freeing her completely. She stared at him, breathing steadily, as if measuring his every move. "You're not here to kill me," he said quietly. He knew she didn't understand the words, but the tone mattered. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing, just slightly, as though considering the meaning. Daniel cut another vine, and this time she landed on her knees in the damp soil. Her hands were still bound in front of her, but her posture was less defensive. She looked up at him and spoke again, her voice softer than before. Daniel gestured toward the path leading back to his camp. She followed his gaze, then shook her head once. He realized she didn't want to be led somewhere she couldn't see for herself. Fair enough. He stepped aside, pointing toward the direction of the setting sun, showing he wasn't forcing her. She remained kneeling for a moment, before finally rising to her feet. Up close, he noticed faint scars across her forearms, the marks of someone who had fought many battles. The sound of movement broke their brief standoff. From the shadows between the massive roots, shapes emerged, 3 more of the reptile-like predators, larger than the one he had killed earlier. Their scaled hides shimmered in the dim light as they moved in a slow, deliberate circle. Daniel's grip tightened on his spear. The alien girl's hands were still bound, but her stance shifted instantly into readiness. Even restrained, she looked like she could do damage. One predator lunged, and Daniel met it with the spear point, driving it back. The second moved toward the alien girl, its jaws opening wide. She spun sideways, driving her knee into its head with a force that sent it crashing into a tree. The third tried to flank them, but Daniel's quick strike caught it in the side, the spearhead punching through its ribs. The smell of iron filled the air as the creatures hissed and retreated into the deeper shadows. Daniel turned toward her, his chest rising and falling from the sudden burst of action. She met his gaze, her breathing just as fast, and for the first time he caught the smallest hint of a smirk on her lips. She muttered something in her language, a short phrase with a tone that almost sounded like approval. He reached for his knife again and cut the bindings from her wrists. She rubbed them briefly, then flexed her hands before looking back at him, freed. She didn't run. Instead, she stepped closer, standing almost shoulder to shoulder with him. It was a gesture Daniel recognized from his own people. It meant she was willing to walk beside him, at least for now. He gave a single nod toward the camp path. This time she didn't hesitate. They moved together, the heavy air of the jungle wrapping around them as the sounds of life returned overhead. As they walked, Daniel realized the balance had shifted. She was no longer his prisoner, but neither was she an ally he could trust. Completely. Somewhere between those two truths was a fragile space where survival might grow into something else. And in this wild, dangerous world, that fragile space was worth protecting. The path to Daniel's camp wound through thick roots and heavy vines. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy above, catching the damp mist that clung to the air. Daniel led the way, moving with practiced steps over the uneven ground. The alien girl followed close behind, her movements light and quick despite the rough terrain. She kept glancing around, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow, as if expecting danger at any moment. When they reached a small clearing, Daniel slowed. The camp was simple but secure, a small shelter built from scavenged metal, a ring of stones for the fire, and a few wooden racks for drying meat. The alien girl stopped at the edge, her gaze moving over every detail. She said something in her language, her tone curious rather than hostile. Daniel dropped his pack beside the shelter and gestured toward the fire pit, inviting her to sit. She didn't move at first, watching him carefully. Then, slowly she stepped forward and lowered herself onto one of the flat stones. Daniel lit the fire with a flint spark, feeding it with dry sticks until flames caught. The warmth spread quickly in the cool jungle shade. He pulled out a strip of smoked meat from his supplies and held it toward her. She hesitated for only a second before taking it, her fingers brushing lightly against his hand. As she ate, Daniel studied her more closely. The armor she wore was unlike anything he had seen, flexible but tough, with faint patterns that seemed to shift when the light hit them. Her hair, deep violet with streaks of silver, was tangled from the trap, but still fell in smooth waves past her shoulders. She ate with controlled, deliberate bites, never letting her eyes leave him for long. When she finished, she set the remaining piece on the stone between them. Daniel pushed it back toward her, but she shook her head. She pointed at him, then at the food, as if insisting he take it. He realized it was her way of showing respect or balance, returning what had been given. He took the piece, biting into it while keeping his gaze steady on hers. A faint flicker passed over her face, something between approval and understanding. The sound of movement in the trees made them both tense. Daniel stood, spear in hand. While she turned toward the noise, her posture shifting instantly into readiness. A figure stepped into the clearing, human, armed with a crossbow, his eyes narrowing when he saw her. "Daniel," the man said sharply, "why is there an alien here?" Daniel didn't lower his weapon. "She's not a threat." The man's gaze stayed locked on her, his knuckles white on the crossbow. The alien girl's stance tightened, but she didn't reach for a weapon. She watched Daniel instead, waiting to see how he would handle it. Daniel took a step toward the man. "She's with me," he said firmly. "She stays." The man looked between them, then spat on the ground. "Your choice, but don't expect anyone else to protect you if she turns on you." Without another word, he backed into the trees and vanished into the green. When the jungle sounds returned, Daniel lowered his spear. The alien girl's golden eyes were fixed on him, the firelight reflecting in their depths. She said something low, almost like a question, and pointed toward where the man had gone. Daniel shook his head. "Not a friend." She seemed to understand, her gaze softening slightly. Then she moved closer to the fire, the tension in her shoulders easing. They spent the rest of the afternoon in a quiet rhythm, Daniel repairing part of the shelter, and the alien girl exploring the edge of the clearing, but never straying too far. Each time she returned, her eyes found his first, as if confirming he was still there. As the sun began to set, painting the canopy in gold and red, Daniel realized the distance between them was shrinking. She was no longer just the girl caught in his trap. She was becoming something else, someone who chose to stay. The night fell quickly over the jungle, bringing with it a chorus of strange calls and the rustle of unseen creatures. The firelight cast a warm glow across the clearing, the shadows stretching and swaying with every flicker of the flames. Daniel sat sharpening his spear while the alien girl rested on the flat stone near the shelter. She seemed calmer now, though her eyes still scanned the darkness beyond the fire's reach. A distant roar broke the rhythm of the night. It was deep and long, carrying through the trees like a warning. Daniel stood instantly, his body tense. The alien girl rose as well, her posture alert. She spoke a single word, sharp and clipped, pointing toward the sound. Daniel didn't need to understand her language to know it meant danger. He grabbed a bundle of dry wood and threw it onto the fire, making the flames leap higher. The sound of heavy footsteps approached from the shadows. Branches cracked and the ground trembled slightly. Then it stepped into view, a massive predator with dark scales, thick claws, and eyes that glowed faintly in the firelight. It moved low, shoulders rolling with each step, its gaze fixed on them. Daniel's grip tightened on his spear. The alien girl took a step forward, her stance low and ready. The beast lunged without warning. Daniel thrust his spear upward, catching it in the shoulder. It roared, twisting to swipe at him with a clawed hand. Before it could strike, the alien girl darted in from the side, moving faster than Daniel had ever seen. She drove her knee into its ribs and brought her elbow down on its neck. The beast stumbled but didn't fall. Daniel pulled his spear free and struck again, aiming for the chest. The predator staggered backward, blood darkening its scales. The alien girl moved in her strikes precise and unrelenting. Together they forced it toward the edge of the clearing. With one final thrust, Daniel drove the spear deep, and the creature collapsed in the dirt. The jungle went silent except for their heavy breathing. Daniel stepped back, the spear still in his hand, while she stood over the beast, her golden eyes bright in the firelight. Slowly, she turned toward him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once, a simple acknowledgement of their shared victory. Daniel returned the gesture. They dragged the carcass away from the camp, leaving it for the scavengers that would come with the dawn. When they returned to the fire, she sat closer to him than before, her eyes reflecting the flames. She said something in her language, her tone softer now. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. It was thanks. As the fire burned lower, Daniel noticed her, watching him from the corner of her eye. It wasn't the guarded look she had worn before. This was different, more curious, more open. She reached down, picked up a small branch, and began drawing shapes in the dirt circles, lines and patterns that looked almost like maps. She pointed to one, then gestured toward the jungle. Daniel realized she was showing him where she had come from. He leaned forward, studying the markings. She tapped another spot on the ground, then pointed toward the fire, then to him. He understood enough to know she was speaking about her being here now, with him, instead of there. Daniel nodded slowly, and she gave a faint smile before brushing the drawings away with her hand. For the rest of the night, they sat in quiet, the fire between them and the vast darkness of the jungle pressing close. By the time the first light of dawn touched the canopy, Daniel knew that the bond between them had grown. They had fought together, eaten together, and now shared a camp with trust building where there had once been suspicion. But in the back of his mind, he understood this fragile peace could be broken at any moment, by her people, by his, or by the wild dangers that surrounded them. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that made every sound sharper. Daniel stepped outside the shelter, spear in hand, and breathed in the damp scent of the jungle. The alien girl was already awake, crouched near the edge of the clearing, watching the trees. Her hair caught the early light, a soft violet glow against the deep green. When she looked back at him, there was no fear in her eyes anymore, only alertness and something close to trust. They shared a simple breakfast of smoked meat and fruit gathered from the trees nearby. She took her portion with a small nod, eating slowly while keeping her gaze on him. Daniel noticed that she now sat closer, the space between them smaller than it had been days ago. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was comfortable, like a shared understanding that didn't need words. The peace broke with the distant sound of engines. Daniel froze, listening. It wasn't the deep rumble of raiders or the light hum of patrol scouts. This was heavier, closer. The alien girl rose instantly, her eyes narrowing. She pointed toward the sound, and then toward herself, her posture tense. Daniel understood her people were near. The question was whether they were here for her rescue, or for revenge. Through the gaps in the trees, the shapes of armored alien vehicles appeared, their sleek black frames moving silently across the jungle floor. Soldiers emerged, armed and scanning the clearing. When they saw her, they called out in their language, their voices sharp with command. She stepped forward, but not toward them. Instead, she stopped beside Daniel. The soldiers hesitated, clearly not expecting that. One of them shouted again, gesturing for her to come. She didn't move. Instead, she spoke back, her tone firm and unyielding. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the defiance in her voice. The soldiers' stances shifted, hands tightening on their weapons. Daniel gripped his spear, ready if they tried to take her by force. The air between the two sides was heavy with the threat of violence. The alien girl raised one hand, palm outward, as if commanding them to wait. She spoke again, slower this time, her voice carrying across the clearing. The soldiers looked at one another, some lowering their weapons slightly. Then their leader gave a sharp signal, and they stepped back. Without another word, the group turned and began retreating into the jungle, their vehicles fading into the distance. Daniel exhaled slowly, lowering his spear. She turned to face him, her golden eyes bright. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she stepped closer, placing her hand briefly on his chest. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle, as she said something he couldn't understand. But the way she held his gaze made the meaning clear. She had chosen to stay. Whatever reason she might have had for returning to her people was gone now. They spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the camp, working side by side. Daniel noticed how naturally they moved together now, passing tools and supplies without needing to speak. The bond between them had been forged in traps, fights, and the constant edge of danger, and it was stronger than either had expected. By the time the sun was high, the clearing felt less like a temporary camp and more like a place meant to be defended. That night, as the fire burned low, Daniel sat sharpening his spear while she leaned back against the shelter wall, eyes half closed, but still listening to the jungle. The sounds of the night creatures rose and fell around them, but inside the clearing there was only calm. Daniel realized that in the short time they had known each other, she had gone from prisoner to partner, from stranger to something far more important. In the heart of the wild, dangerous jungle, they had found not just survival, but a rare kind of trust. And whatever came next, they would face it together.